Spoilers, you can skip some segments. You know what's great? Fear gods that control our existence. I like the Magnus Archives. I finished it a couple of weeks ago as of writing this, and I thought it was fantastic. I'd recommend it to people just getting into horror, since there are little to no jump scares and a lot of fantastic writing. The fact that these 200 episodes are all essentially written by this one guy, and like 65 of them are 8 out of 10 and above, is surreal to me. Anyways, usually I'd rank every episode, but there are 200 of these, and I won't be able to talk about the ones that I want to talk about for a long enough amount of time. And since the less than stellar TMA episodes don't have much to talk about, I decided to pick the best ones. 20 felt like the right number for this, so I chose that. However, there will be some honourable mentions. At the start of each section, I'll give a little overview of the statement, and also which episode. For example, Mag 3000, the story begins. Statement of Joe Spooky regarding sinister happenings. You can skip the episode if you're not up to it yet, but there may be some discussion of spoiler events that happen after any episode, so be cautious. Also, it's quite hard to get footage for a video all about a podcast, so a lot of the footage will be me playing Mayonnaise Simulator. So without further ado, let's get straight into analysing them so that we can admire the sass queen Michael. Mag 108, Monologue. Statement of Adonis Biros regarding his performance on stage. I find the lonely to be such an interesting fear, with some really interesting episodes. While this one isn't necessarily lonely, you could argue the Spiral as he believes everyone around him is being changed, and the Eye with how he's being watched, or the Stranger with the Mask, but it's listed as a lonely episode on YouTube and fandom, and I personally believe it's closest to the lonely. I've always had a fear of loneliness, eternity, and boredom, which sounds stupid until you realize that this universe is expected to be around for another 100 trillion years. What if you just couldn't die? Anyways, got sidetracked. The episode itself has another interesting take on the lonely. I've done a few stage shows, so anything regarding acting or productions I love. There are also some absolutely banger lines in this one.
And I reached oblivion, an absence of applause that nearly deafened me. I tried to listen, to nod, but his eyes were hollow, and I knew that he wasn't really there.
And
all the world's a stage, and I can't escape my monologue.
I think there is a lot of replayability to this one because of all the messages it has. Maybe something about not pretending to be someone else in life, the consequences of relying on others' praise, the dangers of being loved but not liked. The simplistic story also really helps with the memorability. He just does a performance, sees this creepy thing, attacks it, then it invades his entire life. It's a really scary concept and probably a metaphor for something. Mag 106, A Matter of Perspective. Statement of Jan Kilbride regarding his time spent aboard the space station Daedalus. My favourite Vast episode. I've always been a fan of the Vast. I'd definitely be an Avatar, despite my pre-instated fears of... I can get a little obsessed with megalophobia images. I love the idea of these empty warehouses. Just look at how much space there is. I want to run around that. Anyways, the episode is super interesting. I feel like Johnny just had this sudden existential crisis and decided to throw it all on an episode, getting Lydia to read it to a bunch of people. This whole episode just captures an existential crisis so well, the sudden realization that you're not meaningful in the slightest, because beings infinitely greater than you already exist. The way this episode describes this man's fear is one of the most effective in any episode. Some of the future episodes rely on you being scared so that you can understand how the subject is afraid. This is a good way of utilizing show don't tell. However, this episode can't really do that because the whole fear is caused by seeing something unimaginably huge. You couldn't do that even if it weren't a podcast. This episode gets past that by indirectly explaining the fear that this episode represents. It talks about how you can visualize, measure, and to some extent understand small things, but if a thing is too big, the human mind can't do anything. It's powerless to even visualize something universally large, or even large on a planetary scale. It's just too immense. And seeing something like that can really mess with you. This whole episode really flows into itself. There are some time skips and separate scenes, but the writing makes it so you're never confused or feeling like you've missed something. This flowing writing is also in many other fantastic episodes. The post statement is also just top notch. Not just this statement ends strangely because he went back down to Earth. That Elias Melanie scene is definitely in my top 5 favorite non-statement scenes in the entire series. Elias wasn't that interesting of a villain before. He was definitely smart and had a bunch of plans, and he brutally pipe-murdered Jurgen Leitner for an extended period of time, so that's neat, but this is the first example that he's actually a really dangerous guy if you get on his bad side. He also has a really interesting take on his omnipotent power. What if you could transfer information? It's a clever branching path, and I like how it stays consistent throughout the series. Anyways, I could go on, but we have 18 more to get to. Mag 90, Bodybuilder. Statement of Ross Davenport regarding his experiences at a local gym. I'm not the biggest fan of The Flesh. The fears that it portrays are usually a bit one-dimensional, and it just revolves around gross stuff. However, sometimes they find that perfect balance to make a truly chilling episode. Many popular ones include The Man Upstairs and Killing Floor, both of which I really like, but Bodybuilder was the one that truly did it for me. It's my favourite Flesh episode, and I wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did at all. It not only has an absolutely terrifying ending, but the story at the start is really interesting. I like statements because you have supernatural occurrences, but also the story of the statement giver. I find these stories to be nice and relaxing, and they really set the mood for the rest of the statement. The slow burn that it starts with everything seeming normal at first, then noticing some strange things before suddenly being thrown into the terror is just fantastic. It's also an interesting representation of body dysmorphia and eating disorders. As someone who knows very little on the subject, it made me a lot more aware and interested. This episode also is one of the best lines in the entire series.
It was not Marie swinging round and about on the bars. Marie only had 2 arms.
I literally couldn't imagine a better way to show the true nature of the gym. Everything from there on I can imagine vividly. I wish I couldn't. Anyways, this episode is genius and proves that Johnny knows a lot about horror, because we didn't know that already. Mag 48, Lost in the Crowd. Statement of Andrea Nonnis regarding a series of encounters in the streets of Genoa, Italy. This is one of my favourite Lonely episodes, and one of the most underrated episodes in my opinion. I feel like a lot of people like it, but it's talked about so little, and I need to right that wrong. This is one of the most creepy episodes in the entire series, as far as I can tell. This crowd marks its victims, then takes them, all their identity and discernible features. Like, seriously, how do you guys not love this? I like the story at the start as well. I've never been into travelling much, but I totally bought Andrea's love for it. It really helps with the mood. I think making sure your statement giver has a distinct personality is important, especially for Lonely Stranger episodes, because of how much those episodes revolve around losing your identity or looking inside yourself. This was done extremely well in this episode. Also, Jerry! Here he is. That automatically makes this episode worthy of a top 20 spot. This is one I think I could listen to over and over again, because this mixture of too normal and placid to be natural and your identity being stolen really hits me well. This episode was one where I didn't expect it to be as good as it was, and I'm glad it turned out how it did. Anyway, simple story, re-listen to it because it's really good. Mag 32, Hive. Statement of Jane Prentice regarding a wasp's nest in her attic. This episode is nothing short of chilling. This is another one with a flowing style of writing. Each moment bleeds into the other, and the poetic style is a somewhat omen for future Spiral/Season 5 episodes. Being the first of its kind, it is amazing how well it pulls it off. So far, Jane Prentice has been shown to be a force to be reckoned with, being the reason for John's gradual decline, causing Martin's statement and fears, and the worm situation. However, she has been just that, a force. This episode outlines her character. They could have easily just given her the normal, I hate you and I'm going to kill you shtick, but instead they use this opportunity to show that avatars aren't always evil. She's really just an afraid girl who's been infected by thousands of tiny insects. Her unnatural way of communicating and obsessive behavior is uncomfortable, but it shows us enough supernatural elements that you can get lost in the story. This episode is incredibly balanced and perfectly understands the character of Jane Prentice. The pre and post statement is also really interesting. John Snover's statement of Jane Prentice really got me the first time I listened to the episode. Having the one constant in the series, John's professionalism, break a bit is a good way to let you know that this Jane girl means business. The post statement, where he finally caved in and admitted that he knew Jane had to be supernatural, is another professionalism break that does wonders for the mood of the episode. Hearing a bit more about her past, both in and out of statement, is really good, especially since you can call back to it in other episodes. It's strange how focused the corruption is on love and spiritualism. Anyway, sure, it's nothing important. This episode is really creepy, really interestingly written, and provides a lot of insight without giving away any twists. Speaking of twists, Mag 101, another twist. Statement of Michael regarding himself. Michael, there you are, let's go. Finally we get to another Michael episode. Oh yeah, he's such a good character. Voice acted to perfection, delightfully creepy, totally fits his fear. What else could you want? A flamin' hot backstory with plenty of conflict and a perfect revenge plan, you can take that too. Oh, and some fantastic writing on the side, why not? We'll throw in some hilarious moments there too, since you're our best customer. On the house! This episode is quite literally perfect. I had this spoiled to me before this episode, and even I was amazed at the story. This is one of my favourite character backstories just in general. It's so goddamn good. It really paints Gertrude in a new light too. We knew she was willing to sacrifice a lot before, but this is straight up ruthless. The deeper we go into Gertrude, the better she becomes. The story is really heartbreaking and adds a lot to the already really interesting spiral. The way it's written is fantastic. It's strange and not exact, leaving things unexplained or implied. Something a being of pure madness and confusion would want. Hearing the story change in between praising the great twisting and hating Gertrude is really interesting and shows the competing urges of the distortion and Michael. It's a great way of showing that. Also, that repeating line, "he trusted her," is such a good summarization of Michael's bitterness, and Gertrude's lack of compassion. There's also the voice acting. Luke has always had that perfect mix of friendly but dangerous but unsettling, and it works wonders here. Michael sounds betrayed and furious, but that kind of furious where it's like, you're gonna make him pay? You know what I'm talking about. Anyways, Nicola is here too! 2 of the 3 best TMA villains in one episode, who'da thunk? She's only on for about 3 minutes, but she's absolutely hilarious. "Can I call you Elias?" is both a foreshadow and a laugh out loud funny. Breakin and Hope go to get John some moisturizer, and John swears without swearing. There's other funnies with Michael saying that he's going to kill John, and John just sighing, Michael's whole personality and his attempt to kill John, but the door's just locked. That's comedy. I wasn't expecting the episode to follow up "I left the spiral for dinner" to be as funny as that one was, but it is much more than welcome. Also, something that I haven't touched on is the terror of it all. Michael becoming a deceit and confusion monster because Gertrude fed him lies is fantastic, and the lies slowly become more apparent until the very end when it's too late. It's like a cautionary tale, and I love it. The tension is immaculate and carefully constructed, completely blowing open when the danger finally arrives, just like a lie does. It's absolutely fantastic and sets up incredible conflict for later in the series. This episode can do no wrong. Is what I would say if they didn't kill off Michael. Like, what if? Seriously, why? Why would you take a literally perfect character, then give him an amazing backstory only to kill him? I see why he had to die, but can't you do that later? Canonically, it makes sense for Michael to be replaced, but can't you have him still around? Maybe the old Michael or a less strong one? Helen's great and all, but she just isn't Michael. It's so frustrating that this episode dangles amazing stuff in our face, then throws it in the fire. You weren't this close. It also made it way harder for me to enjoy Helen, something I really wish I was able to do better. Her manipulative nature is so fantastic, but is being covered by a Michael-shaped shadow. Still a fantastic episode, though. Mag 29, Cheating Death. Statement of Nathaniel Thorpe regarding his mortality. Goodness, this one is really good. The end has always been a really interesting entity, since there is little it has to do to make people afraid, because of how inevitable it is. Meaning when it does get involved, it usually does little, but it always gets a lot of fear. It's improved even more when we learn that these fears have all attempted a ritual, except for 2. The web for their big plan and the fact that they know it wouldn't work, and the end. Why? Because it's chill like that. It's happy not to take over the world, and understands how to make a profit. Anyways, because of these reasons, and just the whole idea in general, I find there are very few episodes that I dislike. However, Cheating Death was definitely up there. It's unclear whether our number 4 spot is an end episode, but I think it's closest to the Spiral, so Cheating Death is my favourite end episode. Once again, the writing is fantastic. There's nothing actively amazing, but it reminds me of somewhat classical books, where the writing is simple and not a word is wasted, kind of like Hemingway. There doesn't need to be that much complex or abstract description, because the fear that you could die soon is very primal. This episode, like many other terrifying episodes, finds that little nook where fear sits and really awakens it. The way death is very calm, and its unnerving happiness towards strange things is really great. The moment when Nathaniel realizes he was outsmarted by death was absolutely fantastic, and easy to pick up when you know what you're looking for. It also makes sense for it to be told the way it was. Like that one comment on the video says, if he had said that his statement started 200 years ago when he was a soldier in the war, they'd have kicked him out. So now he gets to tell his story without being outcast, and he also gets to flex his writing skills. Either way, this is a great one to put in the background of day-to-day life, with its fantastic writing style and the sinister rather than aggressive evils present in the story. Mag 39, Infestation, an assortment of statements regarding just too many worms. A lot of the time, I dislike climaxes when there is a lack of build-up. Don't get me wrong, Colony and Hive were great episodes to set up Jane Prentice, and the post-statements where they all mention her are all good, but I'd have said that you need more than 2 episodes to set up the villain for a 40-episode series. This seems to get worse when you add on that John somehow knows who he is and never explains to us who she is, or how he knows. I would have said that all those combined would lead to a sudden climax where we don't understand the stakes with an enemy we are expected to fear with little reason to. However, the first few seconds of this episode completely blow away any worry. Actually hearing John being in complete fear for the first time in the series, except in the cliffhanger of the episode before, is terrifying. The commotion makes it so easy to imagine what Jane will do, and all the screaming is such a change of pace from the entire rest of the series that it gets you right in the mood. You suddenly realize why John was so nervous about their encounter, why Martin was sleeping in the archives after his encounter. And that's just the first 10 seconds. I believe that the corruption was one of, if not the best entity to choose for the first season. It's supernatural enough to build up the rest of the series, but standard horror enough to let people easily understand what's happening. That's not to say I had any idea what was happening the first time through. No, I had to read the summary multiple times just to get what was happening at all. That's the main reason this episode isn't higher. I think they could have made it a lot more legible, especially when they're running around the whole archives dealing with a mostly unknown creature who spent our time alone in this room reading spooky stories. Nonetheless, Jane is done really well in this episode. I realize now that not knowing the stakes is good in horror, as long as there's something you should obviously be scared of, because then you can just make the stakes as high as you want, which is great in horror. As I said, her episode sets up her character really well, and this one takes full potential of that. I also think it's okay we don't see much of her in this episode, because I'm sure we'll get a lot more from her in the next episode. Right? Her worms provide such a good thread at this point in the series, and the chaotic episode matches the chaotic nature of the worms, so that's pretty amazing. Finally, one of the most important parts of this episode, it's strangely hilarious. There's not much to say here.
You didn't die here, did you?
John and Martin preparing to die only for Tim to pop up, opening the door directly to Jane, and of course,
statement of Joe Spooky regarding sinister happen
are all staples of TMA now. They don't really distract from the Jane storyline because the worms are scary but also somewhat action focused. Later in the series, humour would have been a detriment like in Hide and Seek, The Eye Opens or Testament, but this series finale wasn't all too focused on horror and more focused on holy crap, it's all coming together. Amazing stuff. Mag 38, Lost and Found. Statement of Andre Romeo regarding a series of misplaced objects lost over the course of 3 months. Perfect! Another Spiral episode, just what I was looking for. I don't think the execution in this one is fantastic. It's good, don't get me wrong, but there isn't anything all too interesting in the writing or pacing. I'm not sure how you would do that with a premise like this, and saying that this episode doesn't have as good writing as some other Spiral episodes isn't a bad thing at all. Anyways, Lost and Found made it this far because this one might just have the best idea out of any episode in the series, only partly because of the homophobic vase memes. I find Spiral episodes hard to identify sometimes because of the Spiral literally just being confusion, but this one is just oozing with Spiral. It's gaslight after gaslight after gaslight, truly making him think he's insane until it all culminates in this descriptive, terrifying vase, and the taking of David is such an interesting concept. Like, did he feel himself getting taken? Was he just never born? Is he dead, unconscious, non-existent, or never even existed at the start? Usually I'd have liked an answer, but the premise for this episode is just that good that I couldn't care less. The writing isn't great for a Spiral episode, but it's still great, especially the line, I remember thinking
that it couldn't be a normal person living in that pot, because the fingernails were too dirty.
Gabriel really messed this guy up. This is a really great episode to listen to over and over again, so it's very deserving of a spot on this list. Mag 170, Recollections of Martin Blackwood. Oh boy. This is a distressing episode, and my favourite lonely episode. Hearing Martin remember his isolation over and over and over again, going through each part of his life, it's really interesting and really well done. It's a nice retrospective of the character, seeing his journey and really ending his character arc. It shows the mistakes he made, how they affected his connections, how scared he was, but him coming to realise that he's finally not alone because of John is just so... Also, this is just really good from a scary aspect. Hearing him go through the same troubles over and over and over again with practically no way to remember what to do is really unnerving. I have a feeling someone in John's family may have had dementia or Alzheimer's, because it's eerily similar in a lot of ways. That's definitely not a bad thing either. The whole "this isn't my house" and talking to the tape recorder really feels like those diseases, and the helpless, almost passive fear and worry correlate well. Anyways, the vignettes of his life are all done really well and sadly, like when he talks about his mother forgetting that she's dead, forgetting he's with John, forgetting who he is, only to suddenly remember the danger, only to suddenly greet the tape recorder again. It's very helpless, which embodies a lot of what The Lonely is. The writing is simple, but it executes these terrifying feelings very well. I feel like the only thing bringing down this episode is that it's pretty long and repetitive, but other than that, this is a genuinely genius and incredibly well told episode. Alrighty, top 10. This is also, coincidentally, where the 10 out of 10s start. The ones before were absolutely fantastic, but these ones are perfect. Now, Mag 74, Fatigue. Statement of Lydia Halligan regarding her insomnia. Holy crap, this is a good episode. Many people have this ranked as their favourite episode in the entire series, and I completely get it. This is probably the one I've listened to the most out of the series because of how calming and well done the writing is. It's definitely a contender for my favourite writing in the series, counted only by other Spiral episodes. I've never suffered from insomnia, and this episode really made me glad of that. The description of how you hallucinate and the way you can't see the difference between dreams as reality is really good. The format of explaining insomnia, creepy event is really good and helps with the bleed technique. This episode is the best execution of that. The areas bleed into each other super well, and each makes more sense the more you listen. I didn't even like this episode first time through. I thought that it was confusing and that it worsened the story. I think that I was just not listening well enough, because the confusion is part of the story itself. Calling back to previous parts is really interesting, like seeing Michael or the billboard. Oh my god, the billboard! The 3 quotes are some of the best in the series. The gradual progression in the stories from, I don't think we have a ceiling fan, to, I'm hallucinating teeth being in my coffee, to, I'm running through twisting streets while this guy laughs at me through the wind, feels all too much, but the 3 quotes tie everything up nice and tightly.
Sleep is overrated. Sleep is for the weak. Sleep no more.
Chilling stuff. I like how this is a Michael episode where he is in the door. I love the variety it brings to the spiral. Episodes that explore the fear of an entity in more subtle ways are some of the best in the series. Think Locked In or Strung Out. This one is really good in that sense, because pretty much everyone has experienced extreme tiredness at some point in their lives. This not only makes the episode much more relatable, but makes it scarier. Like, excluding the Michael stuff, all of this could feasibly happen. This episode is literally perfect in every way. It presents a normal idea and twists it until it becomes terrifying. It has fantastic writing that perfectly conveys the themes Johnny wanted to convey. The pacing is unmatched, with nothing with too much or too little focus. It has Michael, it's a spiral episode, what more could you want? Mag 7, The Piper. Statement of Staff Sergeant Clarence Berry regarding his time serving with Wilfred Owen in the Great War. This will probably be my most controversial pick for the top 10, as there are a few people who don't like the Piper at all. Realistically, I'd probably have recollection and fatigue placed higher, if not for one reason. This was one of the first episodes of the show. If this had been a Season 4 episode, I would have thought that it was very good, but worse than if it were the 7th. This is because this is our first real introduction to the supernatural. Across the Street did have the Not Them doing its thing, but Amy hardly saw it. Thrown Away was pretty weird as well, but there wasn't anything undeniably supernatural. This is the first one in the entire series where there is absolutely a monster, and it did it so well. The whole episode is so completely eerie, something that I had no idea would work so well for the Slaughter. In fact, there are very few Slaughter episodes that I enjoy. Most of the time they don't have much interesting, because mindless violence is just that, mindless. It's hard to pick out the inner workings when most of the time it's just spontaneous. However, this episode decides not to make the episode about the inner workings. Most of the time I don't like older statements, and I'm not just a fan of war fiction in general, but this really paints a beautiful and terrifying picture of war. The description of the silence for months, the commonness of losing friends, the sudden violence, the loud noises, the self-preservation. This episode just explains everything really well, and Wilfred's description of the Piper is incredibly eerie. I find this episode one of the easiest to picture because of the description itself and the idea of this biblically accurate war personification. It got singed so deep into my mind that I remembered it throughout the entire series.
I met the war.
It's also one of the best lines in the series. It perfectly starts the gears turning for what he's about to explain. The metaphor with the Pied Piper of Hamlet is really interesting and provides a lot of discussion, and everything with Wilfred after is incredibly engaging, and one of the best ways to really introduce human avatars. Mag 177, Wonderland, an examination of mental health care. Yep, it's that episode. This is definitely one of the most disturbing episodes in the series for obvious reasons. The second layer of lies and deception is fantastic here, with Dr. David going down as one of the best avatars in the series, despite only appearing once, unless you believe the theory that Andre's husband and David are the same. The only dialogue format is fantastic for this episode, and the dialogue is also great. I'm a little bit surprised that Johnny put a vocal content warning for Locked In, and not this one, but I'm not the right person to judge on that subject. Speaking of which, this segment is going to be shorter, because I don't want to say the wrong thing, and this episode speaks for itself. Anyways, the episode is terrifying, the writing is top-notch, re-listen to it. I'm glad Johnny was able to make an episode with a premise like this. Mag 160, The Eye Opens. Statement of Jonah Magnus regarding his epic prank. Hello John is my favourite line in the series. You can have you're the blank and never did anythings, your take her not me's, your so I got out of the spiral and went to dinners. Actually, that last one, this line uses 2 words to not only obliterate your happiness, but completely explain what's about to happen, establish the character, prove the helplessness, get the gears turning for Jonah's plan, and make you question the gravity of the last 2 episodes, which all ends in you realizing that the gravity of the last 2 episodes have the gravity of a crouton compared to this episode, Ton 618. I was planning to do a video on plot twists before this one, and was going to mention this because of how interesting the reveal is. After about 56 hours of content, it's hard to tie it up neatly and still have dramatic effect. So this is just explanation after explanation after explanation. But it's great, because you can call back, see what you missed. It puts a whole new spin on everything, and a lot of the fans would have figured out parts of it. Each part gets a similar amount of importance to the statement as it did in the series. Jane Prentice gets more importance than Jared, who gets more importance than Mike. Nothing feels wasted, and nothing feels overdone. I also really like Jonah's little talk at the start about how cool he is. arrogant little bit, but it really puts into perspective how big this all is. Most of the time in blockbusters or books, they'll say the world is going to end, which is such an overused sentence that you don't really care anymore. It doesn't hold any weight. You know that it's either simply not going to end, or it is and they spend a bunch of time fixing it. But the line,
I believe there are far more people in this world who would take that bargain than you would ever guess. And I have beaten all of them.
is such a phenomenal line for a number of reasons. It puts Jonah's plan into perspective, it proves his arrogance and self-centeredness, and shows how genius Jonah is for figuring this all out. Sure would be a shame if this giant plan of his turned out to be just part of another giant plan, meaning a lot of this was meaningless. Look, the web's twist is good, but does make this episode way less important. That doesn't dampen how good it is, though, especially with the very end. Holy crap, my favourite part in the series. I don't know how you can even cram this much awesomeness, fear, hopelessness, climactic energy, and excitement into 2 minutes, but this episode did it. The summoning is really intense, and every word is fantastic. I Open the Door is so powerful, and Johnny acts it to perfection. John's admiration mixed with his fear when he sees what's happening is insane, along with,
Look at the sky. It's looking back.
and his laugh reveal. That might just be the best way to end a season I've ever seen. This is probably my favourite season finale ever. You will eventually hear me talk about some other end season episode that would beat this one, but that's the second last episode, the climax, not the epilogue. This episode is the epilogue, where everything is revealed and the final stage is completed. Straight perfection. Mag 86, tucked in. Statement of Benjamin Hattendi regarding a dead friend and an unpleasant encounter. So, this is the scariest episode, right? I know a lot of you guys are going for Lost John's Cave, and I agree that that episode is also terrifying, my number 2 pick. I also know that many Flesh or Spiral episodes get to people, but those episodes might be traumatic or gross or disturbing. This is one of the few episodes that is scary. Making something scary is one of the hardest things to do as a horror writer. You really have to slide into a natural and immutable fear that people have and exploit it over and over again. And fear of the dark is something everyone has. Some people have overcome it more than others, some people like the dark, but it's a fear that everyone has. Because we're not afraid of the dark, we're afraid of what's lurking in there. Why would it need to hide? How close is it? Has it moved? We can't tell. We can't see what's in the dark. We can rationalize ourselves out of this in the real world. Monsters don't exist, so they can't be hiding in the dark. So that's it. No more fear. Except that's not how we work. We are always aware that danger can be near any time. And the dark does everything it can to hide it from us. So if we were able to identify there was a monster in the dark, everything would shatter. So this episode decides to do that, because of course it does. I think this episode isn't fantastic. I feel like the pacing rushes through the start and the dark encounter just a little bit, and the whiplash between this gross and mysterious friend's house to this scary and obvious monster could have been handled better. Even the line is a little on the nose, and I reckon it could have been worded better. But a lot of that doesn't matter, because this episode has the best understanding of what makes people afraid in the entire series, and uses that to make the most memorable, terrifying episode of the entire series. I knew about the line beforehand, and knew it was in this episode, and I was essentially paralyzed listening to it. Later, I listened to it during the day, and felt strong chills when it happened. This episode understands fear the most out of any of them, and I have so much respect for it. This is also a great representation of why the dark should have gotten way more focus. Like with some of the other scary episodes, they were being creative with it, but this is literally what the dark is a fear of. We need more dark. Mag 15, Lost John's Cave. Statement of Laura Popham regarding her experience exploring the 3-county system of caves with her sister Alina Sanderson. I thought it'd be good to have a breather after the scariest episode, so I decided to go with the second scariest. This episode also taps into a really primal fear that pretty much everyone has. Fear of tight spaces. This is an especially good one to choose, because it's easy to exaggerate. Usually, I like being in a small space. They're warm and cozy, and Paul can't find me in them. But if it's so tight that you can barely breathe and you can't escape because the cave keeps moving, then that's a little scary. This episode also perfectly describes claustrophobia for people who don't have claustrophobia. It can make you feel claustrophobic anywhere. Everyone likes... And trust me, we will get to that very soon, but I prefer...
I started to shuffle backwards, and my feet touched against solid rock.
That line just got me really well, and it's so memorable. It also seems to prove that there's some spiral influence, so that just makes the episode better. It's the absolute worst case scenario for when you're going cave diving, just like the monster getting past your protection is the worst case scenario for when you're in a dark bedroom. The terrible things that you're completely unprepared for, because that'll never happen. Now onto the post statement, which makes this episode one of the most interesting in the entire series. Laura saying take her not me for 2 hours and 43 minutes. This poses so many questions. Did Laura kill Alina? How? Is she an avatar of the buried, the dark? Is Alina dead or just constantly suffering? How did Laura manage to lie to the archivist? Did she convince herself that it was true, or was it being an avatar of the dark? This one line makes so many questions, and only by the end of the series can we really figure out what's happening. It makes the episode really interesting to re-listen to, and it's also fantastic the first time round. I love this episode so much. Okay, I'm going to do honourable mentions now, because the top 4 are ultra special episodes. These are distinctly above a line that the others were, each for their own reasons, so it feels like this would be a nice break. In no particular order, 4 other episodes which I thought were fantastic are A. Desecrated Host, Cannibal Priest. This one is probably the second most disturbing episode in the series, partly because of how early it is in the series, but even if it were later, it would still be up there. The moment where you realise what was actually happening with his, I'm sure you can guess the reality of what I was eating, is perfect. This is another fantastic Spiral episode, and it shows off its potential very well, not just with the aforementioned cannibalism, but with the whole religious undertone. B. Cost of living. Selfish ghost kills people. This is another interesting look at the end. It really leaves all the hard work to the avatars, and even then, it's not hard at all. Work smarter, not harder. It really leaves the hard work to the avatars, and even then, it's not hard at all. I love the way Tova figures out that it's the effect on the world that gives her life. It makes the previous killing scene pointless and abominable, which is exactly what the end wants. C. Cul-de-sac. Dreamcore. As someone who is fascinated by Dreamcore and backrooms images, this episode is really good. I love the way normality is portrayed, and the way everything is just a little off. The added fake English and not cooking a chicken on the TV is fantastic, and the guy trying to sell me a brick always makes me laugh, while still being unnerving. Annoyingly, some aspects aren't great, like the whole I was unwise before thing. I don't think it fits into the episode that well. But anyways, D. A Gravedigger's Envy. Man takes a little nap. This episode is really consistent and really well executed. I'd have it as my 21st pick. Hezekiah is my favourite buried avatar and one of my favourite general avatars because this episode really portrays him as this cruel, hardly human man, which is kinda true. He feels really uncomfortable to be around and his progression into the buried is cinematic. Each wrongdoing from envying the girl to leaving someone buried alive feels terrible but inevitable, and it's written in such a serene way, which I absolutely love. Okay, on to the top 4. Mag 65. Binary. Statement of Tessa Winters regarding a strange computer program she downloaded from the deep web 3 months ago. I didn't like this episode first time through. It made me feel uncomfortable in a bad way, and I thought that the supernatural elements weren't outlined enough to separate this episode from a video of a very mentally ill man. I hated this episode for the longest time. Then I listened to it again, and holy crap, I get it now. The only problem, which I'm gonna get out of the way, is that human minds aren't really analog. They're kind of a mix between analog and digital. I know that's true because Google said it. This does kind of unravel the episode, but let's just say that even our minds now can handle being in a computer, okay? Do we agree to that? Anyways, after realizing what this episode was meant to be about, this became one of the greatest episodes in my opinion. This interactive cautionary tale, something similar to Cheating Death, was done really well. A lot of the best episodes start with someone being arrogant and comfortable around something, only to have it turn on them and they end up being scared of it. Think Lost John's Cave, Lost in the Crowd, Fatigue, and Bodybuilder. Every single one of Sergei Yashenka's lines is perfect.
It peels my mind like knives. The maze is sharp on my mind. The angles cut me when I try to think.
These all spark such strong mental images and hint towards the message really well. I also adore the line, that video went for 17 hours. It's such a tense line and shows the sadism of the entity behind this. Speaking of which entity is this episode? It was supposed to be a Spiral episode, which makes a lot of sense, but I always think the end fits this one better. Then again, maybe the corruption with Yashenka's disease and computer corruption? Then again, human-level intelligence stuck inside computers could easily be the extinction too. Then again, Tessa had to watch something she didn't want to, which could be the eye. I love analyzing the story and picking up every little detail, not only to unravel the entity, but because of the fantastic idea and execution of the theme. Person, not computer. Mag 172, Strung Out. The Tragedy of Francis, a comic puppet show in all acts. You know how I said Desecrated Host was the second most disturbing episode in the series? Well, this is the most disturbing, and probably the most genius episode in the series for me. I certainly prefer the next two, but this one is just so... The writing in this episode is in my top 3 most well-written TMA episodes. The stage play format works insanely well, and the juxtaposition between this uniform basic script and this emotional and physical manipulation is just top-notch. Francis's desperation and fury towards the spider is absolutely perfect. They really feel all too human. This is one of the most creative portrayals of the web. As I said before, I love when fears are completely based in reality, but adding on supernatural elements, and this one does that absolutely perfectly. The balance is immaculate, and the way it tricks you with a bunch of supernatural, borderline cartoonish imagery before making you realize the true intentions of the spider is so well done. I didn't quite understand the episode first time through because I listened to it when I was really tired. I figured it was just generic control tactics. Then I re-listened to it and everything came into view. There is really no way to describe this episode other than just getting you to listen. It's genuinely nightmare fuel and everything is orchestrated precisely. I'd consider it to be the best episode in the show. Mag 85, Upon the Stair. Statement of an unknown figure regarding an encounter that may or may not have happened in their home. Okay, this is my favorite episode. I'll have you know I was looking forward to this one beforehand because I already knew about the Antigonish poem, which I loved. I figured that the episode itself would be underwhelming, since I was anticipating it from the start, and not many other people seem to be talking about it, and oh my god, it absolutely lives up to the hype. The ideas in this episode of being in a state of non-existence are all executed so well. This episode probably has the largest amount of recognizable quotes, with the obvious exception of Binary. My personal favorite, my second favorite line in the show is,
I walked, and then I didn't walk, and that got me moving much faster.
That line is so poetic and nonsensical that I wouldn't be surprised if it was part of the actual poem. The scene with his parents is such an indescribable type of horror. Like Dread, where something is clearly wrong, but without the expectation for something to happen, just the knowledge that the tension is going to cling on throughout the entire thing. I can practically feel the silence, and it's described so goddamn well. The strange and disjointed dialogue works wonders to describe the absence of someone who is there, and the sudden reality checks with the mother having blood in her mouth and the father being dead is so intriguing and engaging. I love how they first describe the man who wasn't there too. They need to make the point that it wasn't an outline or a shift, he just simply wasn't there, and how distinctly they recall the absence of creaks and footsteps. I could say something about every single line. Maybe I will, that might be fun. Anyways, just listen to the episode. If you're not up to it or you aren't watching the series, just skip everything on the outside and listen to the statement itself. It's some of the best writing in the show. I've said that statement multiple times, but this one is definitely one you need to listen to the most. It is so consistently perfect, and it doesn't let up with its writing and terror for its entire runtime. So, if third place was my pick for the best, and second place was my favorite, what the hell is first? Well, in all actuality, the episode on its own is certainly amazing, but it only reaches its full potential when paired with the other episodes. This is also first because I want to educate society on the amazingness that is Mag 79, Hide and Seek, an assortment of statements regarding not Sasha playing hide and seek without John's consent. Everyone in the community has been taking this episode for granted. First off, this is the first and only season climax where I understood what was going on. Infestation was an introduction, Stranger and Stranger was intentionally confusing, Panopticon the Last were both just what the hell, and Last Words tackled some pretty large concepts quite quickly. This one is a bit confusing, but it's focused enough on two things that following it becomes so much easier. This means that you can enjoy it first time through, which is exactly what TMA needs. Not only that, but this episode involves the two best characters in the series, Not Sasha and Michael. We already know why Michael is so fantastic.
Let her go.
No?
But Not Sasha is a really interesting case. We'd heard of the Not Them before in Anna's statement, and in the previous two, so we had an idea of what it was like. We also knew that Sasha had been replaced because of the transcripts, infestation, and her voice being different. Human Remains was really tense for that reason. We have no clue what it'll do, and why John doesn't seem to notice. This later makes sense because TMA is some of the best plot hole coverings I've seen, but for most of the season, Not Sasha is so passive and unaggressive that it's easy to forget that she's not her at points. But the ending of The Smell of Blood catches you so off guard and finally lets something start happening. Once again, the tension was building up. John was ending practically every episode with his supplemental paranoia and really only started to suspect Sasha at the end, and we're reminded every time she has a line that she's a fake. It fills you with dread, but John being oblivious was that safety blanket. Narratively, the monster won't attack until it's known, so when it becomes known, the danger is shot through the roof and the viewer is on high alert. Hearing John slowly start to realize what Melanie is talking about is terrifying, and the kind mother really lets you start to imagine what happened. Distant cousin then just adds a bit more tension to the mix and starts the climax. I know a lot of people make fun of John for breaking the table, but I honestly don't blame him. He was under a lot of stress and terror, and breaking the table seems to be a logical thing to do. But hearing Michael pop up and explain everything, with not Sasha slowly approaching in the background, and Michael offers a door, it feels better than the lighter moment in Last Words. Everything finally comes together. 38 episodes of terror and stress and confusion, all end with every single player coming in guns blazing. That is why this one is the most impressive episode to me. They literally combine every single best character, all of the most interesting fears, all of the new character arcs, tape it all into one 14-minute length episode without losing any energy. And it has every single part be entertaining. And there's so much icing on that cake. Michael is voice acted to perfection. Not Sasha has incredibly unnerving audio effects. The hunch in this episode is terrifying. The idea that someone you could know could be replaced at any moment and you'd have no way of knowing is one of the most terrifying things in the show. Tim and Martin have a great rapport with each other. Not Sasha's monologue at the end is so unnerving and well done. This line.
So you really think the Institute is, what, haunted?
I used to, but now I think it's worse.
Worse how?
This line.
I'm sorry, Martin. Tim. Sasha. I'm so sorry.
This line.
Let me tell you a story. You like stories? We could even call it a statement if you want.
This episode has so much unbridled potential, terror, energy, humor, and plot points, and it lives up to every part. So I would call it the best episode in the Magnus archives. So there you have it. I love making this video. TMA is such a great thing to talk about, and I'm very glad I did. You want to know something funny? I wanted to start listening to the show, but I knew I'd do it slowly because many other shows I'd watch would be about 40 episodes and take about 2.5 months. So I decided I'd just give it a go and proceed to listen to 3 episodes a day until I finished it. This series is pretty good. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Screw Jurgen Leitner, cue the outro music.